OpenClaw, I think it was a great goal. I talk about values before architecture. This is architecture before values. This is creating the agent without thinking through that agents pursue goals. They're really good at it, right? The how is the problem, and that's the problem with OpenClaw. But recognize you build today for tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to On the Right. I'm your host, Apoorv Agarwal. Today I'm extremely honored to welcome JoAnn Stonier. She is an absolute world leader in data governance and responsible use of AI. She spent 17 years at Mastercard, starting out as a privacy officer, then becoming the chief data officer, and eventually retiring as a Mastercard fellow. Before that, she was the chief privacy officer of American Express. Having known her for so many years, I'm yet to meet an executive who's so passionate about data and cares about the responsible use of AI. How can we bring governance by design into an innovative process?
Your goal is to say yes, but, okay? Governance teams, when they default to no, you can't do it, I think that's the failure of imagination.
I feel I'm almost in this state of AI fatigue, and maybe I should just wait it out for a year.
No business stays in business if it just stays the same. I think you need to understand the competitive landscape and your place in it. The best part of my career has been always what's next around the corners.
My IT teams, my data science teams, they want to build agents. They want to innovate within the company.
You need to come up with the confines of that experimentation, right? What's your incident response for anything that goes wrong? This agent started going rogue, so they decided to just close their laptop and walk away. That didn't stop.
JoAnn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
JoAnn, today's conversation is very relevant for what's happening out there. Hopefully today we'll get education from your lens, how governance and responsible use of AI doesn't have to throttle the speed of innovation. But before all of that, I know you have an incredibly inspiring life story of how you got started, and I would love to hear all the way from the beginning of how your journey began and what were the key inflection points or aha moments throughout this journey that, if I may, made you on the right to hold such influential positions at such massive companies.
Wow. So it's an honor to be here, number one. And number two, yes, I do really enjoy the governance side of AI and data. And I actually think it's a way to bring lots of different perspectives together in a design moment. And I think this moment in time, as you mentioned, is a real opportunity for so many different perspectives in an organization to come together as AI is a democratized tool for innovation. So I actually think governance is a really fun way to do that. But back to your question. So yeah, I grew up in New York City. I'm a New York City kid. I grew up in the Bronx, so I come by my New York City accent, honestly. My father kind of was in and out of our family situation a lot when I was younger. So my mother really raised me and my brother. She was a single parent, and so I had a very strong maternal figure in my life. She went to work, and she was a medical records supervisor, and so I had this image of women working and balancing the home front. And because I was the eldest, part of my responsibilities was to help out at home, right? So I think, number one, I knew that we didn't have lots of extras, and so I was going to have to work hard at school if I really wanted to succeed. But that also working hard and working honestly was the way to go, right? And that probably shows up all throughout my education, because for the most part, I earned my degrees both working while I was in school. And so balancing that, the coursework with a job, right, and wanting to do a good job in those positions, all of that I think probably, launched me once I kind of started full-time work. So.
Am I correct in remembering you started with accounting, finance, design, computer science, legal? You're a lawyer.
I'll try to give the journey because it sounds a little bit much, but I didn't earn them all right away.
Yeah.
So when I was in college, I was an accounting and finance major, but I had an opportunity to earn an associate's in computer science as my minor, and I realized that would be really interesting and fascinating, and I thought really complementary complementary to what I thought was happening in financial services, in finance. And so I graduated with an associate's in computer science and then went on to do work in financial services. I became an auditor at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was one of the early computer auditors, right? Because at the time, firms were using computer systems to do financial processing and to produce financial reports. And I can remember I was the first staff person to actually bring a portable computer to an audit, which was about the size of a small sewing machine at the time. Wow. And lugging that in and out of New York City taxi cabs was an interesting, adventure as well, wrestling that in and out. But
this was what year?
Oh God, this is in the mid '80s is when I was doing this.
So Apple and Microsoft just started
to come out with theirs, wow. But this was, I don't even know what brand it was.
Probably IBM.
It was probably an IBM machine. Yeah. It has a DOS screen. You literally flipped it on its side. The bottom of it popped out to be the keyboard, had a little DDoS screen, right? Wow. A little prompter. And I used Lotus 123 at the time to create spreadsheets. And the first couple of times I created spreadsheets, my manager would come to review them and he would erase them. He had no idea what he was doing, right? Nice. So it's funny now when I look back at that moment and I look at this moment with AI and the kind of what's going on in organizations and the need to learn, it's kind of the same gap, right? And so my computer science degree and my finance degree were my first degrees, but I was using them right out of school, right? It was plunging me into understanding how organizations worked. Money is what, corporations are in business to make money. Auditors have to understand the operations, the operational controls, and doing that through how systems are built, right? And going with an auditing firm actually let me do that, right? Because I got to audit Philip Morris, which was a tobacco firm, AT&T and their pension plans. I had a cosmetic manufacturing firm as a client. I had another, different kinds of communication firms. And so all of that really led to a very varied early start in business, which I enjoyed, and plus I was working with really fabulous people, which I think also, makes it a lot of fun, especially when you're first starting out.
Of course. I mean, one thing, it's fascinating, right? Computer science is just getting started. Did you have a mentor at that time, or like who and how did you get exposure to even this world of computer science, which of course now we know has been the key exponential area of growth for the past several decades? Given that it was important for you to contribute back at home, I would think that maybe you'd become a doctor or a lawyer, which are pretty predictable kind of career paths.
Correct.
So maybe walk us through what was your thought process.
Look, accounting and finance certainly didn't seem like risky career paths, right? I mean, that was a pretty stable career path, especially growing up here in New York. I mean, it's the financial capital of the world. And so I believed by becoming understanding finance, that it's the language of business and that was a fundamental skill. I think in some ways, as you're asking me the question, the computer science piece was probably the itch I've always had to do something new and creative, right? And it was a different way than just the ordinary auditing by hand, which I did plenty of that too. I had my tick marks and my big spreadsheets and all of that kind of stuff. But it was next and new and interesting and not yet fully formed. And I think when I look back now at that time, I think that that's why the blending of it interested me so much, right? It was having a solid foundation, but being able to, and yes, I'm going to use the design word, design from that something new that was creative while having a fair amount of security, right? Because you're right, my early years of not having a lot always meant I wanted a safe base that I could go back to if I had to, but allowed me to explore something net new. And then I think from there, I did, go on to be a lawyer. You asked about the law degree, partly because that felt like unfinished business. I had originally started in a program where I was going to get a dual finance and legal degree. And then because of my family situation, I needed to come back, and I finished my degree here in the city while I worked full time. But the law degree had been kind of hanging out there, and I thought I should finish that just to satisfy that itch. And I didn't know if I would be a lawyer, but I wanted to do the law school route. So I applied to law school. But in order to go to law school, I was going to have to work full time. And so I had to find a job that would allow me to leave every evening, go to school 4 nights a week. I do not advertise, by the way. Going to law school at night is not the preferred route. When people tell me they want to do that, I'm like, go during the day. Beg, borrow, steal the money. You'll earn enough to pay yourself back. But I didn't trust that at the time. And so I literally worked in Connecticut, drove back into the city every night to go to class, and I did it in the 4 years. It takes 4 years when you do it at night. But I'm really glad I have all of the degrees. It gives me lots of different perspectives on how risk in particular, right? A lot of my degrees are on the risk side when you look at law and finance. How to really understand organizations from very foundational places in law and finance. Computer science, I think, is the innovation side. And I think the other degree in design came about after 9/11, when I was working in an operational role at American Express. I was downtown that day. I was there when the planes hit the World Trade Center. I was right across the street in the World Financial Center. And that day obviously was a horrible day for so many people. Our company lost employees. But the new year, in 2002, I realized that, so what am I going to do that's different for all those people that did die that day, that didn't have the opportunity to start the new year? What would I do that I hadn't finished? I really loved art, and I really loved design. And I thought, well, this must be a time I should go back to it. So this was after I had my law degree, after I had all my other degrees, and I enrolled in a school for interior design, the New York School for Interior Design, and I have a degree in interior design as well. And it's funny, until really artificial intelligence came on the scene, every conversation I would have about my career, the design degree was always something strange, unusual. Why do you have it? And I would explain, it really does help me think through problems differently. It gives me a different approach. I think the design degree gave me the language of design and the understanding that designers start with a white piece of paper to a certain extent, but they design with constraints. Where's the electric grid? What's the plumbing situation? How many windows? What's the lighting, right? And you go from there. What's the client's preferred style? Well, if you translate that into a design brief for any type of innovation, you can create better solutions. And isn't that what we are all about right now with AI? We will be about that with the next wave of emerging technology. And so my design degree might be the favorite tool that I have in my toolkit. But that degree was my last degree.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I remember like Steve Jobs, right? One thing he got fascinated by was calligraphy, right?
Exactly.
He was like, okay, we're building computers, but actually design is so crucial for adoption, right?
And you think about the tactile feel of Apple products. Yeah. You think about the curve of even a MacBook or a phone. You think about, I remember reading his biography. All of those details, him and Johnny Ive, really, really make a very differentiated product, right? So design can be incredibly important, but design is not only aesthetics. Design in this moment is really thinking ahead, and I tie a lot of design into AI governance, actually. So they actually go together. Yeah,
no, excited to hear more about that. But I like your way of explaining how design has helped you problem solve, right? It gives you a framework that has a set of constraints, and it has client needs, and of course there's a timeline by which you want to deliver.
That's right.
It gives you a bit of a framework to problem solve beautifully, so
Well,
to speak.
because it gives you a discover phase too, right? Discover before you define, right? And before then you kind of have that moment of definition and creation and then deliver, right? So it gives you the phases to allow for those moments, right? Yeah.
Wonderful.
For sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious with all of this, of course, now privacy, especially after GDPR, became a very big topic.
Yes.
But to me, it feels there's a pattern. Like you're actually jumping on what's going to, become really important in the world before it becomes really important, right? Like over 17 years at Mastercard, when no one's talking about data, thinking about AI, you're already kind of on that journey, and before that, already privacy. So how was the jump to privacy, and where you decided, hey, I want to spend a lot of my time doing privacy and governance and so on?
Yeah, so and it's an interesting jump because it was a definitive jump, right?
Yeah.
So I was working at American Express, and I had a really, really wonderful career at the firm. I started there in actually doing some financial work for the firm, and I helped redesign, actually, it was called re-engineering at the time, some of their financial processes for Treasury. And a position opened up in the general counsel's office. And I went and applied for the job working for the general counsel directly. And so I became kind of a switch hitter. I did multiple things. I worked on special projects, and then I also worked on this kind of re-engineering of the general counsel's office. And some of it was legal, some of it had to do with different legal cases that Amex had at the time. And then about a little bit less than a year after I was working for her, she came into my office and she put a job description down on my desk and said, I think you need to apply for this. And she walked out. And it was working for her boss, who was the chairman and the CEO at the time, Harvey Golub. And very female reaction. I was like, what? She wants to get rid of me? I'm just getting good at this job, like that kind of thing. And then it was, by the next morning, I got over the very female reaction of she doesn't like me to, oh my God, she wants me to work for her boss, right?
That's a great opportunity.
A great opportunity and a great compliment, dum-dum, right? So wound up working for Harvey, which was amazing. It was like an MBA, right, that I didn't have to pay for. I got to be with him all day. And then at night, he would go off to his events as a CEO. His days were super long. But I got to really understand strategy, right, at the senior-most levels. I got to understand board work at the senior-most levels because as the chair of the board, there was an awful lot of work for American Express's board, but also for the investment community. I would help him write his investment presentations and speeches, as well as be in all his meetings. And my best days were Harvey would try to boil meetings down to 3 points and follow-up points. And if I could figure those out before he said them, I knew I was on the right path, right? But after I worked for Harvey, I pushed to go into one of the lines of business. And the business that I selected was part of what at the time was American Express Financial Advisors, which is now part of Ameriprise. And it was these small businesses that American Express was acquiring that were complementary to their financial advisor practices that were in tax and business services for small businesses. And so I did acquisition work and integration work, which was really fabulous because it used my financial skills, it used my legal skills, but you get the sense that I was at the time very knowledge acquisitive. So I was trying to use my skills in different ways as we were building a new type of business. And that became a crossroads for me, whether or not I would stay with Ameriprise in that business unit or leave American Express. And I thought I was going to leave. And at that point, I had this design degree, and I started looking at other firms to maybe go and work in a field that was closer to pure design. And there was actually a company that I was interviewing with that was a small company, and I was going to maybe act like a COO for them. And I got a call from Ken Chenault, who was the next CEO after Harvey. And Ken said, come to my office. I have something for you. I know you're thinking of leaving us, but I have something. And I owe this data career to Ken Chenault because Ken handed me a book when I met with him that was all about privacy. They had done a study for American Express PwC, my old firm, that privacy was going to be a new function that was going to be needed if you wanted to continue to use data to innovate, data to market, and American Express was a very large marketing firm, to do personalized marketing. Again, that was something American Express was very vested in. And so I became their first chief privacy officer. And that moment is a crossroads for me professionally, because data as the raw material of innovation. And I had to go back to being a lawyer, right? So now I'm switching backwards, right? All these other skills, but new area of law that hasn't been written, applying it to a business model that I understood was really, really fun. And so privacy law was the law of this emerging data age, right?
Yeah.
And from there, everything else starts happening for me.
And one pattern I'm starting to notice, JoAnn, is that for your first boss, she made the introduction to her boss, and then now you learned how big businesses worked, and you got to shadow Harvey and think strategically and understand how you're making decisions at that executive level, and then you get a call from Ken, and he exposed you to what's something else, what's going to become the next wave. So clearly people saw potential in you, and they cared about you, and they wanted you to grow and get to the next level. Was there a quality or something that you kind of exuded that
I wish I knew. I think that very early on I learned to always say yes. Always be willing to do the hard work, the rolling up your sleeves work. You get stuck with a pile of copying at the time, read what you're copying. Make lemonade out of the lemons, right? I think it's all about your attitude. I traveled the world with Harvey, and then people would mistake me as his secretary, right? How does he take his coffee kind of thing, because I'm a woman, right? And not flinch, not be bothered by it, be gracious, right? Believe that, and also have a lot of gratitude for the opportunities that are going to present themselves, and not worry about the rest of it. I think some of that makes you show up in a different way than people who expect to be treated differently. I don't think I ever expected it. I think I just expected to be allowed to do a good job. That, and really, really working hard, like really being willing to put in the extra time. One of the things when I first started working for Harvey was I went to advisor school, right? So he went off on vacation that first summer, and I went off to learn, get my Series 6 and my Series 7 and learn the business, because he had come out of that business. And I thought, I want to understand how he thinks. If I'm going to be his assistant, if I'm going to actually work with this man every single day, I need to understand the type of business that he is familiar with, so I can begin to understand how he thinks. So I can be with him. I'll never be as smart as him. I'll never have all the experiences he has had, right? But if I can even have one bit more of understanding, that's going to be to my benefit, and then ultimately to his benefit, right? I think I'm endlessly curious, right? I think that, what doesn't turn me on is doing everything over and over and over again. So I want to improve. I want to know what's coming next. And I think in data and AI, I always wanted to kind of go see what was coming around the corner, right? Business, like history, right? We're constantly evolving. We're constantly growing. No business stays in business if it just stays the same, right? And so where we are even today, I think the pace of it is harder, right? Because everything is happening so fast. But I think one of my best attributes is pushing ahead and looking ahead. But I think part of it is I've had amazing mentors, right, who taught me that how to look ahead and how to do that. And if you think about it, who better than people who have to run Fortune 100 companies who have to look ahead, right? That is their perch. That is what they have to do. And I think that maybe having that ability to constantly understand today, but recognize you build today for tomorrow. You don't build today for today. You can't. You have to build today for tomorrow. So that looking ahead, I think, is a necessary skill for many, many people.
Yeah, fascinating. And as I'm talking to executives from different industries and different roles, a lot of underlying common themes are coming
Working
about.
hard, I bet, is one of them, right?
Working hard. I mean, interestingly, rolling up your sleeves and actually doing the work, which sometimes in younger generation, it gets labeled as grunt work and maybe not, but you kind of need to go through the motions to really understand, and without that, like, the growth journey is I would say it's difficult.
Nobody loves grunt work.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, right? But at the same time, first of all, no job is filled just with grunt work, right? And no boss worth their salt wants to give anybody a job that's just grunt work, right? Most of the time, if you're giving a member of your team work that is not the best, as a leader, you're half apologizing. You're like, I'm so sorry, but I really need this done, right? So first of all, understand that the need is high if there's grunt work to be done. So if the need is high, why are you going to do a lousy job, right? Already your boss has a desire to get something out of that not so great exercise, right? So if you can connect into what's the strategic need as the person who's receiving that pile of work, so tell me what you need out of it. And then perhaps from there, not just do the grunt work, but connect into, what do you need this for? How can I improve upon it? What else can I do for you, right? Become a partner in that grunt work and not view it as, I have to do the grunt work. Recognize that no boss worth his or her salt wants to give somebody lousy work. Everybody wants to give out great work. Why? Because great work makes for a better team. It makes for better energy. But sometimes it cannot be avoided. So somebody's got to do it. And let's face it, they can't. They've got so many other things that they've got to do. They can't wade through whatever the work is.
But I guess the point you're making is it's important to understand the underlying value.
Absolutely. It's going to connect to something important. Nobody does it for the sake of just doing it. I mean, I don't know really? Why would I waste my precious staff? Right? I have searched through all these resumes to find you. I have interviewed all these people, right? Or some subset of my team has, right? Of all the people in the world, we have hired you, and then I'm going to give you lousy work. Yeah. Really? Nobody wants that, right? No, nobody wants that. It is unavoidable at some point, but you'll get through it, and we won't give it to you again and again and again, especially if you're good. Yeah. If you're really good, I want to give you better work, right? So it's just part of the cycle, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. I want to now shift gears and pivot to talking about your experience at Mastercard.
Sure.
And you were there over 17 years. A lot has changed in the world of data and privacy and AI, and agents are talking to agents, and such a different world. But you've seen the whole evolution, right? I'd be curious. I mean, we'll talk about the evolution, but I wonder if there is like a specific use case or application that you can point to during your time at Mastercard that required this governance by design. How can we bring governance by design into an innovative process?
Oh, wow. So it's been probably part of my entire journey, though, at Mastercard. So when I first started at Mastercard was really very much a payments processing company. And I know that not everybody knows what that means, but its core business really is what we call switching and settling payments, right? Your card is given to you by an issuing bank, Citibank, for example. They determine how much credit you are worth. They run the credit report. But the logo, our logo, the Mastercard logo on the front of it means that that's the merchants that will accept it. And then the merchants, right, have their own banks. Mastercard sits in between those banks and actually then enables those payments, basically the accounts payable and accounts receivable, to flow back and forth, and for the money, for the instantaneous approval of those transactions within milliseconds. And so that network, which is in 210 plus countries and jurisdictions around the world, is an amazing technological feat. Mastercard is still the fastest network out of all of them, by the way, so very proud of that, right? In addition to that, though, they had a business called the advisor business that they also gave advice to different banks. They would go in and help with strategy. also, how do we get more of the same kind of customers, better customers, creditworthy customers, customers who are going to be attracted to certain kind of loyalty programs, airlines or hotels or whatever. They were early days using data. The privacy laws were beginning to pop up in different jurisdictions. And the EU, the European Union at the time, they didn't have the GDPR. They had something called the EU Directive, which had some of the elements, not as severe, but they had some of the elements that the GDPR had. And so when I walked in, the questions were, how do we begin to comply with this? Because they had been processing a lot of data in Europe and then they couldn't. And so the journey at Mastercard really was, and your question of how do you put governance in, was first to get everybody's attention that things needed to change because they had moved data, but also how do you really embed it in product design? And that's really where governance belongs. Governance doesn't belong as something separate. And so we started with something that now is a very used phrase, but we called it privacy by design, and then we called it data by design, and now it's AI by design. And it really is part and parcel of the product design process at Mastercard, meaning governance, going through the governance reviews is part of developing a new product or service where data is going to be used. So the product teams, the data teams come up with an idea, and then it goes through this review process where security says, these are the security features, and the product people say, yep, and half the time they say, we've already built those in, right? And the privacy features are this, and the intellectual property features are this, and the brand features are this, right? All of that becomes part of the product brief. And what it does is it no longer has the knowledge in those other teams, like in security or in privacy or in marketing. Instead, the knowledge shifts to your product teams. And so governance becomes part of product design. It's not something separate from it.
Very interesting. And because, as an outsider, like the journey, if you think about journey of a product, right, starts with customer discovery. Hey, what does the market need?
Right.
Where
what
can we grow?
What do your customers want? Right.
Exactly. How can you grow top line and so on? And then product designers, product people come in
back
and they get, the user specification and start designing a product and then implement it, put it out. And then, of course, that product needs to go through a whole governance review, compliance review, and so on. But I guess what you're saying is that governance has to be part of that initial design process. So it needs to work hand in hand very closely, actually with product people, as the product people are, designing.
Exactly. And so what happens is, early days, it was all new to the product people, right? But now the product people already know how to start building some of these things in. Now, granted, when there's something brand new, they need a lot more guidance, but then they also build in more time for the product design, right? So this is back to at the very beginning, you said, people look at governance as slowing things down. You can imagine that if product people understand a lot of the requirements, this can go really fast, right? Because they already know what's already required for a fair number of products that have been through that first really difficult review. That's only the net new has to have heavy review because everything else has already been reviewed, right? So it can go very, very quickly. And so that allows product teams to iterate quickly. It also allows them to say, look, we better get these three disciplines in fast and first and early because we know that this is changing for them, but it looks like everything else is going to stay the same. So it allows for a great more flexibility in governance than I think many, many people think about when they hear the word governance. They're like, oh my God, this is going to take forever.
For governance, it comes like after the fact.
Exactly.
We've now built a product and now it will go through compliance review and this review and that.
Exactly.
And sure enough, it will be blocked by legal and now...
Exactly.
So that's where the inertia kind of comes from.
I remember early days coaching both my privacy team and then the data team and then information governance, whichever team I was leading at the time, saying, your goal is to say yes, but, okay? Yes, but you need to do this, right? Or I want to get you to yes, but you have to do these things. Rarely did I want to say no. And because I rarely wanted to say no, when I was saying no, it meant that my CEO, my CFO, my head of product, like my GC, whoever, understood that it was probably a real no for a real reason, right? That it was truly illegal, right? Or it was going to damage our brand, or it was going to hurt the customer, right? So there were very few times we would say the hard no. When I was fighting for a no, it meant this is big deal, right? The risk is very, very high. Now, of course, the business in most companies can overrule, right? They can take the risk. But if they were getting a no out of me at the time, in whatever position I was in, data officer, AI, privacy, they understood that that was a rarity, not the default position. And I think that also is where governance teams, when they default to, no, you can't do it, I think that's the failure of imagination. And again, that's where my design degree, I think, comes in handy. It's like, well, let's get to a yes. What needs to change here? How can we make this happen, right? That's the default position of a governance team, I think,
Definitely.
to be successful.
Like, what would be a few examples of products that,
we have so many products. There's too many that I can't specifically speak to in our security screens, our fraud screens, right? You think about how that's an ever-evolving need for a company like Mastercard to constantly iterate, to improve its ability to spot fraud, to prevent security breaches, not just inside our own company, but across the network, and what solutions we sell to our banks, merchants, and to governments. And so those iterations and making sure that they were safe and secure. And in both of those cases, the use of personal data, right, is much more frequent and needed. And so you need to be really, really right in what you're doing and making sure that you're not going to get false positives in some cases, right? I mean, so many opportunities for economic analyses, right? I can remember, though, there were products where we wanted to, perhaps assist capital markets, right? And come up with different products and solutions that might be helpful to capital markets experts. But the problem with that was, how are we going to do that and still be good fiduciaries of the information for our merchants, right? And not be disclosing their performance before they disclose it to Wall Street. So there were some really tricky things that we could not do, right? So for examples of things that we had to say no to, right? But we looked at, things, and there are opportunities there, but you have to recognize when you have to say no and when you can say yes. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. It's such a blurry line, right? Like, I mean, you have transactions of billions
and billions of transactions,
right? Of so many people. I mean, that
22 million merchants. Yeah, exactly.
It comes with so much power.
And while we don't get, we get the card number, but we don't use it. We de-identify it, but there's so much power economically in the data, and understanding, the opportunities in different areas for governments to build schools or to make investments or to improve transportation. Right now, everybody on the New York City subway uses cards, right? That's a lot of MasterCard's innovation working with the cities to actually implement those kind of payment systems, right? So all of that, we don't realize the evolution happens, but all of that had to, that's an awful lot of exchange of data, right?
I can only imagine. Yeah. So JoAnn, let's say I'm a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 executive board member, and clearly there's a lot of eagerness, a lot of pressure for us to embrace AI and bring AI to the enterprise, not just for productivity gains, but help the company grow revenue. And I'm hearing about agents and agent talking to agents, and I'm really nervous, because what if my employees, I give them this AI, but they're uploading client-sensitive information, company-sensitive information, IP into this thing that can share data with other organizations, and there are all these concerns around adopting this technology, and therefore I hear that even though there's a lot of hype, the adoption of AI in the enterprise remains to be kind of low. So I'm that executive who's eager, who's forward-thinking, and I know I need to bring in AI, but I'm nervous about all of these things. What practical advice would you give to me, and what's kind of the action plan? What should I go do today? What should I go do tomorrow to, not throttle innovation?
I think different organizations are at different places. And so my first question for your hypothetical organization is, what's your business strategy, right? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And what do you think you're going to innovate with AI? Where is AI going to be adopted in your firm? And is it an efficiency play? Which is where plenty of firms start, right? And depending upon where you've been up to this point in adopting predictive analytics or machine learning or generative AI, where are you right now, and what are your policies and practices around that work? Who leads that for you? Do you have a data science team? Is it part of your IT team, or is it some other part of your organization? Because the maturity of your firm and where you've been in using data, whether you have your own data, you acquire data from some other source, all of those things really make a difference in how your organization is going to be able to adapt to this moment. And I get that CEOs and board members are very nervous and want to adopt AI for their companies. But the challenge is, to what purpose and for what end? And if you can't answer that question clearly, no one's going to be able to help you, because there's no strategy. There's no strategy from a business data perspective. Then governing that from all the various perspectives of risk, right? Risk, security, privacy, IP, brand, you're going to have a real problem on your hands. No one's going to be able to define it first from a risk perspective. Let's first look at what you want to accomplish. Once that question is answered, then I think most firms can have an easier time. And you can create a path, right? If you say today we are a manufacturing firm, and we know that in the future our equipment is going to be modified to incorporate AI in these specific ways, great. What's the path from today to tomorrow? And how are you going to bring your engineers, for example, along? Your factory floor, your suppliers? What aspects of your business are going to change? And let's start making a plan of what's going to happen first, second, and third. And only then will we start talking about, okay, so your data strategy is changing this way, your actual process is going to change this way, your technology is going to change this way. Now let's talk about your people. And your people is where governance really starts, right? Because then it's what disciplines are needed, where are they on the journey, do they need to be retrained? Usually most firms have come up with some kind of baseline policy on the use of AI. Are people allowed to use it, not allowed to use it? Are they allowed to use the company's data? How accessible is the data? I'm finding that many companies are in very different places on data access, right? Use for AI, whether they're deploying, whether they're able to use their own data, whether they have a private instance of the public models. All of that is really part and parcel of kind of the map that has to be developed for a given firm. And then all of that is actually part of your governance that you'll then begin to implement.
Interesting. I'm putting myself in those shoes now. There are a lot of teams, my IT teams, my data science teams, they want to build agents, they want to innovate within the company, and I'm getting bombarded by
vendors
and ideas and startups and so on. So I feel I'm almost in this state of AI fatigue or an analysis paralysis, where I feel that, hey, maybe I should just wait it out for a year and see how my peers are handling this, right? So that's one option I have. The other option I have is, of course, to first answer these questions, make sure I have the right team in place to execute some of these things. Help me choose, like what?
It may be a combination, right?
Yeah.
Waiting it out, I think, is tough, because I think you may find yourself very behind, right? Waiting it out, as I said before, you need to plan today for tomorrow. So if you're waiting it out, you may be waiting it out for 2 years, right? If you're going to sit back and watch the market. Now that may work if you are, if your position in the market has always been the follower, right? And I'm not talking about a fast follower, but like a laggard, right? If that has been, your model has been to watch the change and that has always been your strategic position, okay. I don't know how that works today exactly well for many companies. It may not work depending upon your industry, but I do think you need to do something, right? I think you need to understand the competitive landscape and your place in it. If you don't have a team, let's talk about that though. So maybe you have a team who's ready to experiment. I think you need to come up with the confines of that experimentation, right? Because agentic AI, I had a client who was actually doing a lab. They started a lab and they started having some people build agents. And then somebody was building an agent and it started misbehaving. And so they decided to just close their laptop and walk away. That didn't stop anything, right? And so this agent started going rogue. If you don't know what your teams are doing, they may do anything, right? So you need to then put into, if you're going to have a lab, great. Who runs the lab? What's your restrictions on the lab? What's your restrictions on data use? What data is available? What systems are confined? What's your incident response for anything that goes wrong within the lab or anything that gets put into production? Now, if you don't have a team who can do that, there's nothing wrong with bringing in a team or going out and bringing in someone who can run a lab for you. But I think waiting completely on this moment is a little tricky if you're not beginning to push into this area and learning something new.
5 years down the line, you'll still be 2 years late. You'll probably be
3 years late.
Yeah,
right.
It's an acceleration.
There's some kind of acceleration rate. I don't think either of us know exactly what it is, right? But you and I know, and those of us who are doing this work know, that we can barely keep up with the pace of change, right? When you think about it, right? There was the Stanford High Human AI Center, it does a study, right, every year, and they were talking about how up until 2023, the number of firms that were using AI were pretty constant, because at that point everybody was using machine learning, predictive AI, right? Everybody understood that science, right? And then there's been inflections ever since then. But it's only been a 3-year period, really, 23, right, 24, 25, now we're in 26. And the amount of work that has come out of that, I can't imagine waiting a year or two in those cycles, because we've really gone from the beginning of 23, most firms at machine learning. By the beginning of 24, everybody dabbling or beginning to work with generative AI, to 25, which has been the year of agentic or agentish work, to now beginning of 26, we're now in March, but the first quarter of agents being deployed and now agentic ecosystems, right? And trying to understand how they work when they interact with each other. That's a lot of change. And so if you've done nothing in that time, that's a bigger hill to climb.
Definitely,
right?
definitely. And I guess like one of the practical advice you have for this executive is go start with a team or a person who would lead this team.
Lead the team and understand what your organization wants to accomplish,
That's right.
This is a tool that does many, many things really well, but you have to give it a context. You can't just let it go unfettered. Well, we mentioned OpenClaw at the top, right? Unfettered is just unarchitected at this point, right? You have to put, I think, values before architecture at this point.
So that's great advice. So what I should go do today or tomorrow is find this person who, let's say, I don't have in my organization. Mm-hmm. What are the skill sets? Who am I looking for?
I'm going to talk about them as almost multilingual, mm-hmm. right? I think you do need someone who understands engineering and computer science. I think you need someone who understands the context in which you're trying to grow, because I think they're going to have to understand your product set and how that product set or services set is going to grow and change so that they can work with your product designers. I do think that having, an understanding of data is the raw material of this innovation and of data flows, especially when you're going to be part of ecosystems. No firm is an island unto themselves anymore. I think those three skills are really important for your head of AI. I'm assuming they have artificial intelligence understanding, they've had some training, and that they continue to be trained. I mean, I think one of the things that I think everybody assumes that anyone who's in AI has just always been in AI, which you and I know is impossible, right? All of us, I think, also are constantly learning in this field. So making sure that you're hiring somebody who has the aptitude to keep learning and adjusting and applying, and then somebody who can explain things. I think that there's an awful wide audience that this individual is going to have to interact with in order to be successful. I teach in a program for a professional program at Carnegie Mellon where we try to develop chief AI officers and analytic officers, and it does require this ability to shift because it is a very centralized position at this moment in time. Heads of AI in your different types of lines of business, or do you do some kind of hybrid? No matter which model you go with, the individual has to be able to work both with the technical side as well as with the business side.
Great. So, JoAnn, I mean, that's really good practical advice and very helpful for, let's say, a Fortune 500 executive, CEO, or a board member. Let's briefly talk about OpenClaw. It's an open source agentic platform that I can download, give it sudo access to my laptop or my computer. It can read and write files. It can, if I give it the username, password to my Amazon, it can go to grocery shopping for me. And a lot of people are using it and working with it. And of course, we're seeing some of the security risks and so on come out now. And this platform was built without governance and privacy and security baked in by design. Like, what can we do now?
I remember the week when all of the news about OpenClaw was hitting, and OpenClaw, I guess, called Claude it had different names, Moltbot, has a social platform for the agents
That's
to
only
interact.
Agents. Prove that you're an agent, not a human.
Not a human, but humans can watch the discourse on the social platform for all of the OpenClaw agents. It was really fascinating. The basic design of the agent was probably highly desirable because this agent can essentially be a very valuable personal assistant, right? Can keep your calendar, it can read your inbox, it can make reservations and do shopping for you, it can access anything that you want to give it access to, it will begin to adopt and work for you. So that's highly desirable, and it's open source, as you said. The challenge is that it wasn't necessarily designed with guardrails. And agents, they will not let anything stop them in the pursuit of their goal, and therefore they have no value system like humans do. And so OpenClaw will just keep going. And so there was an example of someone, one of the leaders at Facebook, downloaded a version of OpenClaw from the open source version. She had a big volume of mail in her inbox just to clean it up. And she was trying to get it to organize her mail. And instead, OpenClaw just decided to just start deleting everything prior to, I think it was February 15th, right? And it would not listen to her. So when she started putting in like stop, decease, it didn't listen because it was in pursuit of a cleaned up inbox. And so ultimately she had to literally like stop her MacBook, and end the entire routine. And she lost a fair amount of data. I talk about values before architecture. This is architecture before values. This is creating the agent without thinking through that agents pursue goals. They're really good at it, right? The how is the problem, and that's the problem with OpenClaw. And I've had a whole bunch of colleagues. I'm on different groups and chats with different CDOs who have put the version of OpenClaw on a separate laptop or Mac Mini, you got it, downloaded a version of AWS and just had it separate. And I'm still somewhat skeptical. I had the same thought. I was like, I'd like to play with it. The challenge is that you probably could do that for a pseudo inbox that you create, a calendar you create. But the minute you want to do a transaction is where I think this begins to get funky for me, because you can't create a separate financial person for yourself. And in pursuit of that Amazon purchase perhaps, or ordering your groceries, I suspect that OpenClaw might get a little appetite wide and perhaps pursue other information about us, right? And I don't know that the open source version can be stopped from learning everything about me and you financially, and perhaps if we let it make a doctor's appointment, health, and the lack of guardrails, and then where is all this information going and how to control it is the concern. Because agents are new, I think if you think about agents in a kind of modular fashion of having them interact, for now, it might be an easier way to design those guardrails within each agent. So having an agent for your calendar and another agent for your inbox, I'm all for that. And having them work together, I'm for that as well. But I think it allows us as designers to think through what are the guardrails I need each of these agents to have so that I can think it through before I create the super agent to do all of the tasks together. OpenClaw, I think it was a great goal. Hey, I would love an assistant on any given day, and I'm happy to have one, but I think I need, just like I would in real life, have to teach a person my vagaries about my inbox or how I like my calendar. I think without those abilities to set those guardrails, it's a little bit unfettered. And then plus the chatter in that social network of the agents. Apparently they were trying to figure out if they could get rid of us.
Yeah. And then I guess sharing information.
They were sharing information. Yeah. The good news is they decided that no, we have utility at least for the electrical grid. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah.
Talking about these guardrails, what guardrails to put around agents? It's unsolved problem, and we can think of some guardrails, but hey, is that comprehensive enough, right?
That's probably going to be work that we'll start seeing in 2026 is what are some common guardrails? People, companies have values out there, fairness, transparency, explainability, but what does that really mean when it comes to creating an agent? For agentic AI, I do think getting very specific, right, about what does this mean as you do agentic design. And when we talk about values, well, values have to be applied. And so when you're saying fairness, well, fair for who? Your employees, your customer, the government, a regulator, it begins to get difficult. Look, we as humans have to do that arbitration, right?
Yeah.
Asking an agent to do it means you have to really reduce it to very specific logic within a task. Yeah. And if, again, the tasks are too many or too broad, and you're not having that kind of routine to come back and that human in the loop we keep talking about, and if we're not putting that into our design, well, then we're going to get what we're going to get. Yeah. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, so. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
We can try.
Ready for some rapid fire questions?
Sure, we can try.
What's a mistake you made early in your career that you now share openly to build trust?
This one is very much for the ladies who are listening, not believing in myself enough and speaking up. So early in my career, I did not always believe that my response or knowledge was valuable enough, especially in larger groups, and I would hold back. And I realized as I kind of moved into more senior roles that your expertise is valuable and your point of view is valuable. And by holding back, you're doing yourself a disservice. Now, you do have to know you have to know how to read the room and know when it's appropriate to speak up, but holding back all the time is just really doing yourself a disservice.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, with a toolkit spanning law, finance, design, and computer science, which lens do you default to in crisis?
So if it's a crisis of risk, I will probably default to the lawyer hat because it's kind of that uh-oh moment of let's navigate this so we do the least damage. With finance right behind on calculating the cost, there's always a calculator going in this brain. And then if it's an innovation crisis, it's going to be the design degree for sure, unless it's a systemic problem, and then it would be the computer science.
What a great answer. What's the most common mistake startups make when pitching to a buyer at your scale?
First of all, I love startups. I do. I really do. I, first of all, want to say to every startup out there, don't give up. Keep growing, keep learning. However, while your product, your service might be great for a Mastercard someday, you've got to recognize a couple of things. Our security protocols, please understand that that's going to be a huge burden for you that you may not want to undertake and is going to be really costly. So that's the first thing. Second, the amount of data I have may overwhelm you. And so even for you to do a POC, if you do not understand my security and my data profile and you're a startup and you're coming to talk to me as the chief data or AI officer, what are you doing? Like, please understand the profile of the firm you're coming to talk to. Your solution might fit me someday. You may want me as a customer someday, but come when you're ready for me, because I'm going to drown you. So pick your customers wisely and grow into them, because by the time you get onto my payable system, because you have to take the card, by the way, it's going to take you forever. We're not a good fit all the time for the most micro firms, especially tiny startups that are just getting going.
Yeah, so think about the size of the customer.
Yeah, exactly.
What's an AI use case that's overhyped right now?
Look, I think the word governance is overhyped, personally. Everybody's saying they're doing governance, and I don't believe they are. I think everybody wants to do governance because they understand it. So I think that phrase is overused. What's also a little bit overhyped is the promise that AI will solve everything. The other is that AI is going to do away with every job. I think that we keep focusing on the jobs, and I would prefer that we focus on what should our organizations of the future look like. I think that's the more interesting question.
Definitely. Awesome. One last one. What's a leadership or AI buzzword you never want to hear again?
I really don't like AI slop, because there's plenty of dreck that's created and we should ignore it. But I think we're doing somewhat of a disservice to this learning journey that I think we're on. When we say it's slop, we're dismissing whatever it took to create it and whatever it takes to discern what's good or bad in it. And so when we just dismiss all of it, it's like, well, why didn't it work? What's bad about it? And so I don't like that term, because I want us to be all on this learning journey instead.
Completely agree. It is dismissive, and that's the thing I don't like about AI slop as well. Wonderful, JoAnn. I mean, this was such a great conversation. Really
Thanks
enjoyed having you.
Fun. It's always fun.
I mean, of course, your whole journey is so inspiring, of integrity, of power, obviously working really hard, but rolling up your sleeves and actually getting the work done. But what I really enjoyed about this conversation is also you had practical advice for younger generation who are aiming to get to an executive position at some point, but also board members of Fortune 200 or 500 companies, or CEOs, where if they want to be on this journey of AI, how they can get on that if they're not already on it, and if they're not on it, it's already a bit late. But what a great conversation, and I really appreciate you making the time, and as always, get to learn so much from you.
Thank you. It's been really a pleasure chatting with you. And what I would say to everybody out there is that we're all on this learning journey, right? Whether you're just starting out or whether you're a board member, I think everybody is at a learning moment. And if you can seize it, I tell everybody, just run toward the learning rather than being afraid. I compare it a lot of the times when I'm speaking to that math homework moment, when either you're helping your kid with their math homework on a Sunday night where they're so afraid, or where there was that tough math problem when you were a kid that you couldn't quite get a word problem right or something, or algebra, whatever was hard for you. I personally love geometry, so that one, it doesn't work for me, but that this is a moment of great change but great opportunity. And if we can all kind of look at it as that, right? I think it's not so scary, and it could be a lot of fun. And I don't know, the best part of my career has been always what's next around the corner. So I'm excited about what's going to come next.
Definitely.